Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Line Miller, your host. This episode, you are going to be amazed and excited. We have Dmitry Zog. He is the co-founder and chief technology officer for Cultivated Biosciences with us. Welcome to the show, Dmitry.
Hi, thank you. Thanks a lot, Pam, for the invite. I'm very
Yeah.
happy to be here and to be able to talk a bit more about what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think our audience is going to be amazed because we're talking about producing products and ingredients that traditionally have been animal based, but there aren't any animals involved. And so tell me what you do at Cultivated Biosciences.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what we are doing or what we are trying to do is to close the gap between the plant-based products and the real products that are existing, in particular in the dairy sector. So to be a bit more concrete, we are solving problems of texture or mouthfeel, of creaminess, of stability that the current plant-based products, plant-based dairy have. And so to do that, we're using the power of fermentation pretty much.
Yeah, that's exciting because there has been a big push for plant-based products, but as you're saying, they fall short in certain areas. And in particular, for us as consumers, that mouth feel and the texture, that is so important to the end product and how that ingredient provides those particular attributes for us. How do you do what you're doing? Don't
Yes,
give away any trade secrets, Dimitri, but like, how are you doing what you do?
yeah, it's a good question. So as mentioned, we are using fermentation for that. And so to be a bit more precise, we have several steps in the process, but it's a process that is in the end similar to a brewing process. In the brewing process, you give in by reactor some sugars, and some yeast would convert these sugars into alcohol and CO2. And we do something that is slightly similar, but we are using different yeast so that in the end, instead of producing alcohol and CO2, they are producing fats. And
Ah,
then we extract these fats or this lipid in a certain way as to obtain an emulsion.
okay.
And now I'm going to explain a bit more about, if you want, about how it is working in a bit more concrete terms.
Yes, I would love that.
So in this first step that I mentioned, we have yeast that are growing. And we put some kind of stress to these yeast. We put them a bit in a winter mode. And when those yeast feel that it's winter, they feel that they want to accumulate fat. And so they eat up all the sugar, and then within them they have big lipid droplets inside. It can be up to 50% of the mass of the cells. It consists of lipids. And what is interesting with this is that those lipids, they have some layers around. They have some kind of membranes. And this membrane will give some interesting functionality. This is a membrane that is actually similar to the milk fat droplets.
Okay.
And this is the first step. So in this first step, we end up with some yeast cells that contain many little droplets of fat inside. And then we have a second step. And so in the second step, this is also a bit of our trade secret, but we extract those lipid droplets in a certain way as to keep the functionality of the lipid droplets. So we keep it, and then in the end, we obtain an emulsion. And the emulsion is our ingredients that we can use for different products. And so now I can just show you how it looks like. So this is the emulsion for those on the camera or that are watching the video. This is the emulsion. And so if we look a bit closer, I'm not sure if you can see with the camera, but it is flowing and it is very white. And it is not oil. It is not oil. It is really an emulsion. And this is entirely natural. There is no other ingredient than yeast into this one. So it's really an ingredient that is natural, that is coming from the fermentation. We are not adding additives. It is non-GMO. And though through the gentle extraction process that we're doing, we obtain these unique characteristics of the ingredients, pretty much.
Well, Dimitri, that is fascinating. I think one of the pushbacks that I hear about the fermentation product process, because there are different innovative experiments going on with companies in different areas with kind of a fermentation process, but what I hear you, they're concerned about what you're adding in there and the nutrition that you add, et cetera. What you're saying is there's just yeast in there
Yes,
and the lipids, which is just not anything created um, by you. I mean, it's part of what happens in the scientifically. You're not
yeah. So essentially, we indeed, um, I think it's a good way of explaining what we are doing by explaining what we are not doing.
okay, perfect.
So on one side, what we're not doing is we're not doing recombinant proteins. So essentially, we are not using microorganisms that we modify, that we do some GMO modifications in order to secrete very specific protein, for example, casein. And then there is the specific extraction of that particular protein. So this is not what we're doing. We are non-GMO.
Yeah,
Then the
great.
second thing that we are not, as I mentioned before, we are not lipids, we are not fats. What we're really providing is a solution. It's an emulsion that has all these functionalities. But indeed, I think we are a little bit apart from different technologies and different companies and startup in the way that in the end, our process is using a gentle way of extracting almost 100% of what is present in the biomass.
Yeah,
And so
genius.
that's also a way to do it differently that I think is appealing to consumers and also manufacturers in the end.
Absolutely. I think, thanks for explaining what you're not doing that differentiates you from some other processes, because I think that's the important part about what we're talking about here. And then the end result you get is that unique emulsion that is going to give some of the attributes as you use that as an ingredient in
Yes,
different products.
yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we have the first part where we obtain the biomass, the second part when we extract to obtain the emulsion, and then that's not really done. We are a B2B company, so in the end, what we're selling is these ingredients, but that's really an ingredient that then has to be applied in different kind of products. And so that's the next step that we would then give our clients to do. So we are discussing obviously with many clients around the world. They are very interested in the product. We would give them the ingredients, and then they can use it in the way that is most beneficial for them. And so now we can maybe explain to you a bit more what we are seeing with our emulsion, or
Yeah, that'd be
some of the
great.
benefits that we see, right? So obviously there is one thing, which is the creaminess. And this is unparalleled. Now, with the plant-based, it's always complicated to obtain a creaminess that really replicates what is in the real dairy products.
Yeah.
And that is interesting because in the end, there is, at least in my opinion, there is a lot of research that has been done to try to replicate it, but still it doesn't quite replicate what the real dairy are doing. So one thing is the creaminess. The other thing is on the stability. We see that in some complicated applications, by complicated, I mean, if you are using an emulsion at a low pH or at a high temperature, or when you can have separation,
Right.
some of the plant-based, they do not work. And our emulsion turns out, we don't quite understand exactly why, but turns out to have a very good stability. So creaminess, stability, we can do a encapsulation of flavors. We have also very good foaming and so on. So these are some of the functionality that we can bring to the markets. But yes, you
Well,
wanted to, yeah.
yeah, the stability part is critical though, because that you're giving the ingredient to be a part of a manufacturing process for your customer, and they have all different products they're trying to produce. So the stability piece is very important, that it be able to withstand whatever manufacturing process is required for the product that it's going to be put into. So I didn't want you to skip over that too fast and move on to foaminess, which is also important, but I think stability would be a key characteristic in addition to.
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, the stability, I think it's created by the fact that we have very small lipid droplets, and we have this layer around the lipid droplets that protects it, that makes the disemulsion stable, while with other product, it tends to coalesce and then to separate.
Yeah.
And so with the stability, we've seen, for example, that in coffee can be complicated because it is hot, it is acidic, and when you add some emulsions in it, it can separate. Otherwise, it doesn't give a good whitening. And so that's one of the things that we see is one of the value proposition of our ingredient.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. And then the foaminess, you mentioned that as well.
Yes, the foaminess as well.
Mm.
As mentioned before, and maybe it goes back again a little bit to the composition of our emulsion. And again, we are not lipids. We have a composition that contains lipids, but also protein and also fibers and polysaccharides.
Yeah.
And so some of the proteins that are present, they manage to create the stability, but also to have a good foaming. And
Yeah.
so in the end, we've done some tests for example, for barista, and it is better than what we've compared with the standard, essentially.
Okay, that's very exciting. I mean, what even gave you the idea to get started? When did you get started and how did you even come up with this? For our innovative listeners who are interested to know how the smart minds, because you're one of the co-founders, how did you and your other co-founder, come up with how'd you get started?
Yeah. So the initial idea came from my co-founder. And my co-founder, he studied working a bit on the recombinant proteins, essentially. I'm making it short, but he started working on the recombinant proteins because he believed that there would be a good way of bringing benefits to the planet and the animals by working on the recombinant proteins. The thing he noticed, though, was that there are now already quite a lot of startups that were working on this specific topic. So the market was a little bit busy. There was not a lot of white space, not a lot of blue space essentially to work on.
Yeah.
And then he shifted a bit to working on the lipids. And that came from the GFI, the Good Food Institute. In the Good Food Institute, for the listeners who are looking for ideas, and they have beautiful databases and beautiful information. And in these, they were explaining what were the areas most interesting to work on. And so one of these areas was on fats and lipids. And so he started developing a small prototype in small scale. It was back then in little shake flask and having a little tiny bits. And then with this prototype, he was looking at creating a startup and making it a real product.
Yeah.
And that's when we joined together and we started working on that. And now we managed to essentially to take these few milliliters in a shake flask, or the shake flask, the little 100 or 200 milliliters things that you see in the labs, until now having scaled the process so that we can produce dozens of kilos of products in industrial bioreactors of more than 1,000 liters, and we have obviously some supply chain is being set up and so on. So we've done a long way, but it started initially with that.
Yeah, very exciting on the scaling because that's all, that can be a challenge. It might work
Yeah,
smaller when you try to
it
scale
is.
it larger to be more commercial. That's
Yeah.
when you run into the problem. Well, what other problems are you solving in the food industry with this business too? I mean, this is an interesting area to work in. You talked
Yeah.
about the planet and the animals, and probably for manufacturers to have a more stable source of ingredients that are
Mm-hmm.
good quality ingredients, non-GMO, some of the other qualities that you talked about.
Yeah. It's good that you mentioned it, because just before I mentioned only about the functionality, which is one of the main value proposition that the ingredient brings. But it's also interesting to look at other factors on top of the functionality. And one of them is the fact that we can replace many ingredients with one single ingredient. Right now, to make a decent plant-based product, you usually need to add several products together. So some proteins, but also some emulsifiers, some stabilizers, some gums, and so on. So you have different things that you need to add together. And one of the other advantage that we're bringing is that instead of having the lipids that are mixed with all of these products, then we have this disruptive approach of being able to replicate it with one single ingredient. So that has the advantage of potentially simplifying the supply chain for our clients. And on the other side, it's also making it a clean label. So some of the consumers, they don't really want to have many E numbers. I don't know how it is in the US, but in Europe, we have these E numbers, which are for the additives. So they don't want to have too many E numbers or too many GMOs and so on. So that's one of the other advantages that we are bringing. And then finally, like linked to this, it can also simplify the supply chain, as I mentioned before, by being one ingredient that you can produce locally, and that has the potential of being of having less fluctuation from the market.
Yeah, interesting that you brought out the additives and the E numbers. We don't particularly have that in the US, but in other parts of the world, obviously. You're in Switzerland,
Yeah.
but in other parts of the world, they identify those additives. I mean, they a little differently. However, minimizing those is definitely what consumers are focused on right now. That is absolutely a consumer trend, is minimizing, having that clean label that you were talking about. Let's minimize all those things that are getting added into our food. We want to stay as pure as possible. So your one ingredient solution really is aligned with consumer trends that are happening right now in the market. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to bring out to our audience about Cultivated Biosciences or the initiative that you have, or thoughts for the future for them?
Yeah, good question. I'm not so sure. I can talk a bit more about our future, maybe to have a bit of an outlook of where we are going. That could be interesting. And now, as I mentioned before, we can produce dozens of kilos of the cream. We said it has very interesting functionality. It's bringing some value. The next step will be to make some long-term partnerships with some of the clients with which we are discussing in order to enter the market, actually in the US first, and then in Europe afterwards. So some of the next step will involve the scale up still of our production process, the submission of a GRAS, generally recognized as safe by the FDA regulatory process as well. And then in the end, the goal is to enter the US market. The fact that we are GRAS is a bit a constraint for us. In Europe, the novel food is taking a bit too long to enter on the market. So that's one of the reasons why we're entering the US market.
Okay.
So that's going to be one thing that we're doing. So obviously we are looking at people that will be interested in testing and using our unique properties into their supply chain.
Yeah.
Something else that we're also doing right now, which is also interesting, it's a rebranding. We believe that in the end, like the cultivated name is something that we really liked from the start, but at the same time, it has this connotation that is linked to cultivated meat, which we are also not. That's another way to differentiate ourselves. We are not linked to cultivated meat, and so we are working on a rebranding and trying to take all the characteristics and all the functions that we have into a single aligned way of explaining it. So that's something else. And yes, maybe also a little message then, if I may. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So maybe a little message as well. I think in the end we see today that some of the plant-based products they are not being used as much as some of the producers were expecting, and I think that there is still a large gap into the functionality that the plant-based is bringing. And so for all the people that would be interested, obviously, in trying to improve what's on the market, I think it's totally valuable and it brings a lot. And I think it can really have an impact on both the planet and the ethics. And so that's very important in my opinion.
Yeah, very exciting. And we'd be happy to have you in the US. I'm sure there are a lot of manufacturers that are interested in an ingredient like yours. So best of luck with that part. And I guess to our audience too, that might be some of those forward-thinking innovators, Dimitri. You know, your co-founder didn't stop right where he was. He was like searching for an area where he could make an impact and joining together with you. And I guess by way of encouragement, there are lots of areas where we can use our gifts to make an impact, and you just have to search for what that might be for you. And I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your results so far with us. This is being recorded towards the beginning of 2025. So as far as the rebranding, stay tuned because this will be evergreen, but you might
Yeah.
not find them under Cultivated Biosciences, but you will find them. We'll have links in the show notes, and please leave us your comments and let us know what you thought about this innovative concept, this interview, and we would love to know your thoughts. Until our next show, I'm Pam Linemiller. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.